What is a scientifically proven fact you refuse to believe? Story 1. The fact that our eyes see everything upside down and back into our brain, we have to flip the image. Just crazy. This is the one that throws my brain for a loop every time. All the sensory processing stuff actually freaks me out. The reality is that what I see might not be what you see, and we may never have the means to communicate that clearly enough to confirm we all see the same things. Brains are fascinating. Story 2. That fruits and vegetables do not decay faster when I'm the one paying for them. Have you tried rinsing them in a vinegar and water bath? I do this with all of my quick rotting fruits and veg, and it seems to really work. I mix a bowl of water with some vinegar in it. About a quarter of the liquid should be vinegar. The 1.99, a bottle white vinegar is fine. And dunk berries and peppers and things in there for about a minute. I swear they last up to a week longer this way. Oh, and for lettuce, I wrap them in paper towels, or just tuck a paper towel in the box or bag if that is how you buy them. If they are drenched from the grocery store sprinklers, I go ahead and dry them off before even putting them in the cart. Story 3. Sailboats can go faster than the wind blows. 25 knot winds? The boat can go 30 plus knots with just the sail power alone. For me, it's not so surprising that sailboats can go faster than the wind at an angle to the wind. For example, if the wind is directly out of the south at 25 knots and the boat is going 30 plus knots in a, say, northwesterly direction, I can accept that. But what really blew me away when I learned it was that sometimes sailboats can go so fast at an angle to the wind that their direct downwind component of their velocity can be actually faster than the wind. In other words, it's possible to release a balloon and let it drift with the wind, and a sailboat can tack back and forth towards a point downwind and beat the balloon to that point. Granted, it's only the most advanced sailboats that can do this, and it's a relatively recent advancement for water sailing vessels due to the invention of hydrofoiling boats. But land yachts and ice sailing boats have been doing it for ages. Story 4. That many living people have Neanderthal DNA, mostly in non-African ethnicities. My DNA is apparently more Neanderthal than 93% of the population tested to date by 23andMe. That many living people have the DNA of another non-modern species. Is that the right word? The Denisovans, mostly certain Asian ethnicities. How many more non-modern species of DNA do humans carry that we just have not identified? How many others did we interbreed with? What are we? Story 5. I know it's true, but I still find it hard to believe that viruses are not considered living organisms. There are a lot of factors, but the two biggest ones, I think, are the fact that they are inert and do not use energy when not in a host, and that they cannot self-replicate without said host. Hard to believe something capable of so much death and destruction is probably not even conscious. I find this one hard to believe as well, mostly because being alive implies not being dead, and being dead implies not being alive. It's a black and white concept. Then, viruses come along, fitting in the gray area on that scale. Basically dead without a host, but very much alive within a host. Story 6. Not really refuse to believe, more having a really hard time to wrap my head around it. The survival of the human race, especially in relation to how time and work intensive our reproduction is. I know amazing leaps were done in fertility treatment, reproduction medicine, and infant care. Yet, at its core, it's still the same process. The offspring has to be grown for roughly 40 weeks inside a female body. It takes hours, sometimes even days, of heavy pain to birth the offspring. And even when that's done, human babies are 100% helpless and dependent on someone for a good while. Sometimes one even just forgets how to breathe and dies. Somehow we still manage to grow in population by a hell of a lot. It boggles my mind how biology hasn't found a safer, less time and work intensive way for us to reproduce, yet our population exploded. Story 7. The solution to the Monty Hall paradox. I can even do the math myself, but it still feels intuitively wrong. The scenario: you're on a game show and the host offers you a choice between three doors. Behind one door is $1,000,000. Behind the other two doors, you get nothing. You make your choice. But before the host opens the door to reveal what's inside, he opens one of the other two doors to reveal nothing behind that one. He then offers you a second choice. Do you keep the door that you already chose, or do you switch to the other unopened door? Does it matter? Intuitively, it feels like it shouldn't matter, that you have a 50-50 chance of winning whether you switch to the other door or keep the one you chose originally. Mathematical reality. You should switch. You have double the chance of winning the money if you switch to the other door compared with staying put. Close second. In any random group of just 23 people, you will have more than 50% chance that at least two of them will share the same birthday. Again, I can do the math to prove this, but it still doesn't feel right. Story 8. The double slit experiments and all their variations still weird me out. As someone who hasn't studied the necessary fundamentals, it just seems like the light particles know whether or not you're watching and will change their behavior depending on what you're expecting them to do. Story 9. That the speed of light can't be broken. They said flight was physically impossible with a machine, then they said breaking the sound barrier was impossible. I just don't believe that we're right this time either. The speed of light is a whole other level. The speed of sound is broken by the tip of a whip. It's not too hard and never impossible. The speed of light is fundamental to the universe. It really has nothing to do with light. It's the speed that information can travel. The gravitational force of the sun travels at the speed of light, meaning if the sun vanished, the Earth would still orbit it for 8 minutes, which is the time it takes for the Earth to know the sun is gone. We are actually always moving at the speed of light. It's just that we move that fast through time rather than space. Think of normal time progression as going through time at the speed of light. And any movement you make through space, you have to subtract that much movement through time. So if I am going 3 parts out of 4 the speed of light through space, I am now only going a quarter the speed of light through time. Roughly, I believe there's some trig involved. So going the speed of light means I stop experiencing time. Not to mention it would take infinite energy. It's just not happening. Story 10. If you believe anything because it's scientifically proven, you're doing science wrong. Science doesn't say, this is true. Science says, I think this might be true. Here's the experiment I did. These are the results, and they seem to indicate that my theory is true. Please try to find if I made any mistakes and see if your own experiments can disprove my theory. If nobody can disprove your theory, it's generally accepted until somebody comes up with one that more closely matches observations. If you're told, this is true, and you can't question it, you're not doing science, you're doing religion. Story 11. Honestly, nothing. If I don't understand a scientific concept, I'm not going to assume it's because it's impossible. It's because I don't have the literal years of studying and research to even begin to understand the framework of a concept. If people have been studying something for literal decades, constantly adjusting their theories whenever new evidence is acquired, I'd be an idiot to think I know better than them. It's like an anti-vaxxer who read one article and assumed they know more than every medical professional. I enjoy casually learning about physics. I can't do math, but if there's a 30-minute YouTube video explaining what time dilation is, I'll watch it in a heartbeat. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that I know enough about theoretical physics to know I know absolutely nothing about theoretical physics. Story 12. That dark matter and energy exists. We've yet to directly observe any of it, only the indirect effects via gravity. And even Einstein himself acknowledged that his model of physics was incomplete. We understand gravity now better than Newton did, but there are still gaps. While the body of evidence supporting dark matter theory is extensive, we're one step away from demolishing and reinventing all of modern physics. One day, a new Einstein will come along and invent an even more robust model of gravity, and it could reveal that our supposed dark matter was really the result of a huge flaw. Story 13. I refuse to believe that all snowflakes in the entirety of history are unique. You mean to tell me that all snowflakes ever across the entire globe are completely unique? That can't be mathematically possible. Like a single storm that drops 3 inches on my house must be a million flakes. Multiply that by the area of that storm and the depth of the snow, and that number becomes huge. Then add that to every storm in the history of the whole globe. I just can't believe that we have seen every snowflake and have come to the definite conclusion that they're all unique. Scientists aren't at my house cataloging the snowflakes. How do they know? Story 14. Certain quantum mechanics, specifically the popular conclusion from the double slit experiment. The assertion that particles know that they're being observed is just absurd. Also, quantum mechanics imply that there is no such thing as objective reality, and I refuse that assertion. The cat is either dead or alive. It can't be both. They don't know in the sense of being sentient and understanding this. The experiment just reveals that the different mechanical methods that humans employ to observe and examine the subatomic world yield different results. It's a reaction to particular mechanical environments, not a perception or comprehension on the part of the particles. Story 15. The whole quantum stuff blows my mind. Like, are you trying to tell me that as long as I don't look, everything happens in parallel and resolves to every possible outcome, but stabilizes as soon as I look? What? Yeah, I'm not denying it. It's just so mind-blowing. I'm not a physicist as well, but my understanding is this. You looking at it doesn't matter. It's not about observation, it's about interaction. Observation is what physicists call measuring something. To observe something, you need to interact with it. Unless you interact with stuff, it's in superposition, many states at once. Interacting with the stuff forces it to manifest a concrete state from the multiple ones. It's still mind boggling, but that's because normal objects don't behave this way day to day. The quantum world is more complex. However, saying that you need to observe something makes people think of a passive action that's not interacting with a particle. This is not the case here. Story 16. Even though I studied in science, to me, luck, chance, coincidence don't actually exist, but are the expression of consequences for which we don't control all the causes. In my mind, the universe is completely deterministic, as in, if you are precise enough or have enough information, you can always assume the outcome, or probability of an outcome, from a cause, or initial state, as we call it. And our universe is a gigantic probability tree with absurdly large information feedback. I love science philosophy, and I feel very close to Laplace's point of view. Can't recommend enough to read his work, especially the Essai philosophique sur les probabilités, which is mind-opening. And even though Poincaré and Lorentz' work in chaos theory can still fit in that conception, quantum mechanics relies on the fact that there are some absolute limitations to the information we can obtain. And even though in the macroscopic world it is not really a problem, the fact that a whole field of science is based on that, and that for the most part, it is very solid and can have some concrete applications, bothers me a lot. Story 17. I don't refuse it, but it just warps my brain every time I think about it. And I'm obsessed with it, so I think about it a lot. The electromagnetic spectrum and the visual spectrum that we see in. If we could see a fraction more in either direction, we would witness constant barrages of light and energy explosions all around us. Just unimaginable amounts of energy everywhere. And the idea that even asterisk, slight asterisk, pushes in those directions could lead to the force, or premonition, the bug in a pool idea. Imagine a bug floating on the water in the corner of the pool. You toss a rock anywhere in the pool, and the ripples will reach the bug. Now picture several sources of ripple. You can see the ripples, and where they come from, etc. If you could see just some of the ways energy and light is affected by everything, you could know when someone is walking around a corner, for example, paraphrased heavily. Story 18. To be completely honest, there isn't really such a thing as scientific proof because the scientific method aims to do the opposite of proving things. Experiments are designed to try as rigorously as possible to disprove a hypothesis, and it's only considered correct upon failing to do so. And if the experiment gathers as much data supporting a hypothesis as it does data that doesn't, then it's inconclusive and requires further research and experiments. The reason it's preferable to design experiments this way is because it safeguards against confirmation bias, taking control over the experiment. Story 19. The interpretation of the double slit experiment. Fire photons at a small vertical gap, the slit, and there will be a pattern of detectable photons striking a panel at the other side that will group around the slit. They spread out in a pattern, much as you would expect for any particle fired at any slit. This is fine. Do this with a bunch of photos at two slits, and they create multiple stripes on the other side, like they're interfering with each other the same way waves do. This is also fine and confirms that photons have the characteristics of waves. Now do the double slit experiment many times with a single photon. The individual photon will act as if it has been affected by other photons, even though there are no other photons to act in it. This part is proven. You can perform this experiment at a well-resourced physics lab at any university. Why does it do this? This bit is not proven. One of the leading hypotheses is that there are parallel universes where the same experiment is being performed by alternate universe scientists, and their photons are affecting this universe's single photon. Story 20. Elephants are known to bury their dead under foliage and remain with the bodies for some time afterward, exhibiting behavior not dissimilar to human mourning. Indeed, it is the association of apparent grief or mourning that is considered to indicate a burial, as opposed to simply covering up or disposing of a body. I also read somewhere that they have buried humans. Elephants have also been witnessed returning to these burial sites year after year to stroke and caress the bones of their loved ones in what appears to be a memorial ritual. They are so emotionally intelligent. Story 21. Most people know that the mosquito is the deadliest animal when it comes to total human deaths ever, next to humans, of course. And this is due to the malaria parasites spread by mosquitoes. It is estimated that 4 to 5% of all humans that have ever lived died from malaria, rather than half as some sources state. The treatment for malaria is quinine, which was known since the 1700s. This is often contained in tonic water, which is bitter and not that palatable. The anecdotal story is that during the days of British colonization of India, the British East India Company had, of course, problems with malaria. Drinking tonic water was not popular with the British, so what did they do? Add booze, that is gin, and this is where you get gin and tonic. Of course, modern research has shown that the amount of tonic water you'd need is quite large, 1 liter for a minimal effect, to make that story apocryphal at best. Although I know some people who probably managed to meet the necessary quota to ward off malaria. But it is interesting to think that we managed to make the treatment for one of the worst diseases humanity has known into a cocktail. What is real, though, is that malaria can be used to treat syphilis. Malaria causes a high fever, which kills the syphilis bacteria. In fact, Dr. Julius Wagner Jauregg received the Nobel Prize in Physiology in 1927 for this discovery, but he later became a hardcore German and eugenics. Of course, we no longer use this because the mortality rate was 15%, but this was much lower than the death rate for syphilis. Unfortunately, many parts of the world still suffer from malaria, where it is still a major killer. Story 22. The Amazon rainforest isn't actually the lungs of Earth. Almost all the oxygen generated by the Amazon is used by the life found in the Amazon. 40% of Earth's oxygen is actually produced by tiny organisms called diatoms. These organisms can replicate at an incredible rate, and trillions of them spread throughout the oceans and create oxygen through photosynthesis. When the diatoms die, they transform into underwater snowflakes that remain on the seafloor. When these seas dry up, the dead diatoms create a salt desert, like the one in northern Africa. Huge sandstorms pick the diatoms up and carry them across the oceans and drop them down on the Amazon and are used as a fertilizer for the rainforest. Where are diatoms born? The rainforest, they spread to the sea, create oxygen through photosynthesis, die, create salt deserts, get taken back to the rainforest, and help create the rainforest that creates them. That's the circle of life right there. Story 23. Humans are upside down. Actually, all vertebrates are too. To put it very basically, the genes which map out the general arrangement of animal body plans include those which define a dorsal and ventral surface, the top side and underside of most animals. For us bipedal humans, our front and back. For the majority of animals, these genes are the other way up. This is why insects, for example, have nerve bundles arranged along the ventral side, and the heart or major blood vessels, etc., are more dorsally arranged, completely opposite to us. Even invertebrates, more closely related to us in the deuterostomia, example sea urchins, don't have our inverted gene expression. At some point in the evolution of chordates, one of our ancestors took to living upside down. I've read it suggests that this ancestor may have been a marine burrowing animal for which orientation wouldn't have mattered much. Story 8,000 years ago, 17 women reproduced for every one man. It's not that men were cannon fodder and were dying like red shirts in Star Trek. It's that the only men who'd managed to reproduce back then were the most wealthy and powerful ones. In other words, we had good old harems. Gradually, we moved to more monogamous societies and family structures that paired a woman with each man because the situation was becoming untenable for the lower class males, and that was leading to instability. So when you think about it, monogamy is nothing more than communism, which would in turn make me, a fiercely monogamous person, a radical communist. Story 25. Entropy. All energy within the universe is tending towards disorder, unusable, and gone forever. So that steak you have for lunch gives you a unit of energy to use as you see fit, but then it's gone forever, taking the universe one step closer to being a still, frozen wasteland. So how do you use that energy? Read a book, go to work, listen to music, create, fight with your partner, complain about your meal. Sometimes I look at people and just think, what a waste of energy you are. How dare you? Story 26. There was a linguist who plotted out the frequency of letters in the book Ulysses, and they had a straight minus one line plot. This pattern repeated in other languages. Other scientists applied the same logic to baby babble, sounds as letters, I guess, and there was no pattern at all. Other scientists applied this to dolphin clicks and found the same pattern, implying their language is just as complex as human language. Their baby babble is just as incoherent, and their language is one they also have to learn. In theory, we may be able to translate this. Story 27. Many astronauts who go to space and see Earth from space have a shift in awareness. They really begin to see humans as all being one united species that should not be fighting wars or competing for resources. They see all of Earth and think we need to get along with each other and also preserve the Earth. Astronauts also report feeling incredibly small and fragile. They see Earth and life as fragile and precious. Back when human space travel was still new, it was customary in Russia to send war veterans, particularly old flight pilots, into space. One incredibly well respected veteran, who was known for his total support and patriotism of Russia, came back telling everyone to stop fighting. His views totally switched. At the time, Russian astronauts never took a second flight into space, but they asked him to. His ship blew up. Most people think the Russian government blew up his ship on purpose to talk about world peace and the horrors of war. Story 28. The vast majority of drugs are still absolutely fine after their use by date. Of course, this can vary widely based on the specific drug, so do some research and make sure that it is still safe to use after expiration. However, the majority of drugs only experience a very minimal reduction in potency over time. Most drugs will still be 90% effective, even if expired by a couple of years. Most of the time, pharmaceutical companies have to put shortened expiry dates on products because they cannot guarantee that they will deliver the exact correct dose after a few years. Also, they often do still deliver an acceptable dose. But the pharmaceutical company doesn't have all of the evidence to support an expiration extension claim, or the product may fail under worst case storage conditions. For example, stored in a 40-degree C storage chamber for years. A lot of people waste good drugs by throwing them out unnecessarily just because they're a few months out of date.